lower left corner. Take it away, Mike. Mike? I'm not sure what happened. Mike was with us just a few minutes ago. He doesn't seem to be with us right now. So if everybody would just hang on a minute, I will give him a call.
Hold on a second. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. I'm guessing we're ready to go ahead and get started. So I will go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Mike Wilder. I am the issue coordinator at Wisconsin Voices. I also serve as the co-chair of the African American Roundtable. That is a civic engagement table that strives to increase civic engagement in the African American community here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I'm joining Mike tonight. My name's Dana Schultz. I'm the Communications and Outreach Director at Wisconsin Voices. I'll be piping in, talking about the messaging and communication side, about talking about voting rights, what happened recently in Wisconsin, what we have to look forward to, and how to reach more people about our democracy.
Absolutely. So let's just go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody, first of all, for joining us tonight. This is the second webinar I've been able to do. The first one was back in March regarding the inequality campaign that we were running at Wisconsin Jobs Now. But I want to start off by talking about our democracy. What makes America great is the strength of our democracy. That's why we're here. We're on a quest, and that quest is to strengthen families in our community and make sure that we create a better place for our kids to inherit. This quest is rooted in upholding freedom and justice in all for our democracy. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started.
So do you see what Mike did there? I just want to pause and say Mike didn't jump right into policies or specific issues or statistics. He took the time to pause and name the core of the issue. What's this really all about? This is about the values that unite us and what we're really striving to do. Not pass any policy, but make our world a better place and make sure our democracy works. So also it's important to point out how fundamental of an issue democracy is to every other issue that we care about. Change, reproductive rights, it's fundamental to our collective success.
Okay. So I want to, go ahead and dive right into what's been happening. If anybody's been watching the news, everybody knows what's been happening. The election laws in Wisconsin have changed a bit. So I want to first go over that. The recent changes to Wisconsin election laws are as follows. There have been early voting limitations, new voter registration residency requirements, and new poll observer requirements. These early voting limitations effectively eliminates weekend in-person absentee voting in the state of Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. And evening locations. So it's important to know that there's only one location per municipality for early voting. So in places like big cities like Milwaukee, there still will only be one place to go, but just with less hours.
Absolutely, and that's going to make a huge impact. The mayor has come out against this. Neil Albrecht of the Milwaukee Election Commission has come out against this. Election clerks have come out against this, but the legislature passed it anyway by a narrow vote. The governor signed it with a partial veto, but he did not veto the portion that would eliminate weekend early and absentee voting in Wisconsin. There are also new voter registration residency requirements, and that effectively pretty much is that when a person that is a special deputy registrar registers someone to vote in the state of Wisconsin, they have to have the current address on their ID to vote. And that's huge because the special deputy registrar will have to sign an affidavit saying that that person they registered to vote had a current address on their ID when they registered them.
So another way to get around this is if the person doesn't have a current photo ID or address on their photo ID, which by the way, I don't. I move almost every year and so do many people. So this is a huge barrier for a lot of folks that don't have a current ID. You can use your bank account or a We Energies bill or something that ties you to your current address. But think about that as, if you're registering people at a grocery store, who's got that with them? So it's just something that we need to think about, especially for those of us who care a lot about voter registration and getting people, new voters or people who move a lot, ready to vote.
Also, there are new poll observer requirements in the state of Wisconsin. Now, a poll observer is allowed to come within 3 feet of an elector. That is huge because we've had issues of intimidation at polling places in such places as Milwaukee and Madison. We've had them all across the state of Wisconsin reported to the Milwaukee Election Protection. But it's huge. It will have a huge impact on intimidation at the polls. And these, to sum it up, these 3 changes were all opposed by the Our Democracy 2020 Coalition, and they also have been opposed by the African American Roundtable. I do see questions on the side, and we will get to all of those questions at the end.
Cool. Obviously, we're not talking about the national and very historic Supreme Court case that just passed regarding campaign contributions and really lifting the cap of that. So we're not here to talk about that tonight, but it very much has big implications for Wisconsin and the country in terms of people with a lot of money have now a lot more access to participation, and we oppose that, and we're going to see how it plays out in Wisconsin.
So let's get to why these changes actually matter this year. And that answer is simple: drop-off voters. And drop-off voters, we see in the statistics in this slide, we see the statewide drop-off voters, which in 2008 and 10, the average drop-off was about 28%. In the city of Milwaukee, that number increased. The average drop-off from 2008 to 2010 was about 33%. That is huge. And these changes to our election laws could very well impact, these drop-off voters as well.
So every non-presidential election is when our governor is up for election. So it's just how the calendar works. If we want to reach the kind of level of participation that we've seen in presidential years, it's going to take a miracle. But what we're going to have to do a lot of work to make sure that people don't become more and more cynical, but actually realize that we have to do something about it. We have to participate. We have to connect the issues we care about with voting.
So because of these laws, hardworking Wisconsin families are not only denied access to the American dream, but they're being denied their patriotic rights and freedoms to participate in our democracy. Participation is the oxygen that breathes life into our state and our country, and cheaters are trying to rig the system and suffocate the oxygen out of our democracy. So think of this as Earth. We need oxygen to survive. And what's going on is they're trying to suck the oxygen out of our democracy. Our democracy thrives on people having this oxygen, on people having this right, this basic fundamental right to vote. And what's being done is this basic fundamental right is being under attack.
So Mike just talked about a metaphor and a visceral one that's emotion about oxygen being like the breath to breathe. And if we continue to have these laws that choke us, we're choking our democracy. So it's a simplifying metaphor. It's used a lot in messaging to really understand how democracy works or another system works. And he also made sure to frame this as immoral, like it's a right and wrong issue, and we want to be on the right side of it.
Absolutely. It's making it harder for folks to vote, harder to register, and harder to have our voices heard without piles of cash. It's not only wrong, but it's unpatriotic. So these changes are bad. However, we still, in the state of Wisconsin, have some good provisions that we need to fight to protect. The number one provision that we need to protect that has been under attack for the past 2 years is same-day registration. That is something that we need to go all out in fighting to protect. And I believe, me personally, I don't have any proof, but I believe the provision most under attack after 2014's election. So beyond these elections, we need to keep a watchful eye and make sure that we're vigilant in protecting same-day registration in the state of Wisconsin.
84% of Wisconsinites use same-day registration to register to vote between 2008 and 2012. This is widely popular, widely used, and it will drastically affect levels of participation if it's taken away. So this is something we've got to maintain to keep our democracy strong.
So one more thing that came up but did not get very far is the fact that campaign contributions could be doubled. They did not get doubled, and that is something that we need to have a watchful eye for as well. The legislature has not been the best at keeping money out of our politics locally. We've seen the Supreme Court decision about federal elections, but locally we've seen more provisions that will keep money in politics. The campaign contributions did not get doubled, but we want to make sure that they continue to not get doubled. So we want to always keep a vigilant, watchful eye on that. Also, photo ID is still tied up at the state Supreme Court level, and that is something that we need to pay attention to as well, because the governor has said publicly that if the Supreme Court says that the legislature can move on forward with a photo ID law, except with certain provisions, they're going to do that. So the governor has called for the legislature to come into special session after the photo ID decision is going to be made by the state Supreme Court. So we need to watch for what's going to happen in that special session, because what they're going to try to do is say, just as the Supreme Court says we can't do it this way, we're going to do it this way, and we're going to make so that people have to show photo IDs at the polls, which is unpatriotic.
And I just want to pipe in, and there's been a lot of back and forth around how to talk about and understanding photo ID. Many people have a photo ID. Between 80 and 90% of folks have it. So the vast majority of folks don't understand why this is a big deal. They're like, hey, that just makes sense. We support photo ID and even showing proof of citizenship. But we all know that that's putting undue barriers on people to vote, and that's wrong and unconstitutional, like Mike said. But I just want to give you two ways, an old way of talking about photo ID and a new way. So the old way is a little bit divisive and gets very partisan right away. So an old way of talking about it is saying there's no real need for voter ID laws. It's just those bad actors trying to stop people they don't want voting from doing so. That's an old way. Notice the difference in how we're suggesting to talk about it, which acknowledges that people understand photo ID and they have them and they think it's common sense, but then pivots to how this is wrong. So here's the new way. It's important for Americans to prove their identity at the polling place, but strict laws that require one specific type of government-issued ID that more than 20 million American voters don't have, eligible voters the right to vote. So that was just acknowledging what's common sense to most people, but then pivoting to why this bill is wrong and it's in the wrong direction.
So one way that we can really go on offense here, because I feel like since 2010, which is almost 4 years now, we have been so on the defense on voter rights issues here in Wisconsin that we forget we have to be on offense. So Representative Gingrich has introduced a voter modernization bill that everyone needs to get behind. Some of the things that are in the voter modernization bill are as follows. Automatic voter registration. It would be the responsibility of the GAB, which is the Government Accountability Board, to facilitate registration for each individual.
Woohoo!
Online registration. which is huge. We are, social media, and we are just becoming an online society, so it's huge to have voter registration that can be done online. That will get more people to participate in our democracy. And what another thing that the bill does is it makes registration more portable by updating address information through national change of address requests with the post office. That is huge because, particularly in the African American community, I'll use it as an example. We have a very transient population, especially in the inner city of Milwaukee. We move a lot. So having that provision in there will make sure a lot of people still maintain that right even when they move.
So I want to point out how important it is to name and to work towards a bold and aspirational vision for our democracy. We're not just trying to fight back all the negative things. We're trying to maintain and strengthen where we're going and modernize and get with the 21st century so that registration is a no-brainer. That should not be a barrier whatsoever. It's all about voter education and getting people to the polls, and registration shouldn't be the barrier. This bill is like no other in the country. We would be leading the country if this passed. So this is what we're working towards, whether it be next year or the year after.
Absolutely. So the number 2 thing we need to fight for is restoration of voting rights upon release. As of right now, if you are a felon in the state of Wisconsin and you are still on paper, you cannot vote. When you get off paper, you can vote. What we need to do is make it so that everybody has that right to vote. If you have paid your debt to society for whatever you've done, once you pay that debt, you should be able to cast a ballot. And a governor's candidate actually was challenged on this at a meeting in Milwaukee, Mary Burke, and she came out publicly supporting restoration of voting rights upon release. And that's huge because we need to make this we need to get these issues into the platform of statewide candidates. Statewide candidates should not be able to run for a statewide office without having to declare their position on restoration of voting rights upon release. One other thing we need to fight for is redistricting reform. And I don't have to tell people that are on this webinar why we need to do that. In 2012, the Democrats in the state legislature won about 200,000 more votes than the Republicans, yet the Republicans maintained a supermajority in the assembly, and they regained their majority in the state senate. So what we need to do, and that's not representative of the votes, so we need to ramp up the fight for redistricting reform right after this election. Come 2015, that needs to be everything that we fight for, redistricting reform, because as we get closer to 2020, the incumbents that we want to push this would not have the political will to do it because they're going to be trying to protect their own seats and their own self-interest.
Yeah, redistricting reform has not necessarily been the most sexy of issues, but we see every day the effects of gerrymandering. The Democrats had the opportunity to do this reform in 2009 and didn't, and we can no longer let either side allow to have an unfair and untransparent process.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be this way. We can all work together like we have in the past for a government that works for we the people. And it's time for us to strengthen our democracy by modernizing our voting system. And this is about bringing life back into what our country is and what makes our country strong. And that's people participating in their democracy.
So saying that, I'm just really excited that we do have a bold and aspirational vision. We aren't just saying things are bad, but we need to talk about what is hopeful and our solutions. So, and then we got to have a plan to win.
So I want to get to our, and this is the last slide for those of you that are wondering. We will take questions after this slide. But here at Wisconsin Voices, we have an Our Democracy 2020 structure. We have a table and a steering committee, but we also have subcommittees in this structure. We have a subcommittee on voting rights, a subcommittee on redistricting and fair courts, a subcommittee on reenfranchisement, and also a subcommittee on people over money. I encourage everybody that's on this webinar and everybody you know to get involved in one or more of these subcommittees because we are going to be ramping them up and making sure that we go on offense on the issues of democracy that really affect the state of Wisconsin and voting and elections here. we want to tie that into a year-round civic engagement mobilization of the Rising American Electorate. And I'll have Dana explain what the Rising American Electorate is.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I do that, our next Democracy 2020 meeting is on April 17th here in, actually it's in Madison. We're going to rotate from Madison to Milwaukee. So we will send out more details on that following this webinar. But the Rising American Electorate, as some of you may know, is comprised of the majority of eligible voters, but the deep minority of who actually vote. So that's composed of single women, unmarried women. It's composed of people of color and people under 30. So folks under 30 are the biggest folks that vote during the presidential year and then don't during the year. But we don't just want people to vote. We want people to be involved with their government and their policies and the things that they care about. We want them to know who their elected officials are, what different levels of government they can call about issues, and we want people to be informed year-round. So that's something Wisconsin Voices is committed to, and the Democracy 2020 is going to plan for the long term as we do year-round civic engagement of the Rising American Electorate.
Absolutely, and I did obtain the information. Our next civic engagement meeting is April 17th
I'm about to unmute my mic,
Washington Park Library. I believe the address there is 2121 North Sherman Boulevard. We will be upstairs. It will begin at 10 a.m. I encourage everybody who can make it to that to make it and come. And we won't be long. We'll be about 10 to 12. But we need folks to plug into these subcommittees because we have at Wisconsin Voices about 95 organizations within our network. So when we say we're going to work collaboratively for a strategic plan to make this work, we're going to do it. The date, again, is April 17th, and it's at Washington Park Library, 2121 North Sherman Boulevard, and that's at 10 a.m.
So I said Madison, scratch that. This is Milwaukee meeting.
This is the Milwaukee meeting.
But we're going statewide with the Democracy 2020.
And so with that being said, that's the end of our presentation. I want to open up for questions. We went about, actually we were on time, which was kind of surprising, but so anyone that has questions, please ask. I do see a question from Kathleen that says, has the residency requirements bill been signed by the governor? And that answer is yes. He did sign that just this week. And so applied to the August elections and to the November elections. And that is going to be huge because, like I said, the way that special deputy registrars have been registering folks in the state of Wisconsin has totally now changed. And everybody needs to know about these changes and how it will affect the people that we want to get out to vote.
We have another question that says, would you please send us the framing language and the aspirational vision? Yes, and I actually want to do one more. So I'll send out some slides specifically about the old way of talking about voting ID and the new way. Also talk about, send out a democracy narrative. And that's kind of incorporates the aspirational vision, talks about heroes and villains of strengthening our democracy. I also want to invite you all to a narrative training. And this is really exciting. We've been working with a group out of Washington State called Heroes Handbook. And they have been doing testing all around the country. It's a full-day training, again, at Washington Park Library, and it's on Friday, April 25th. I'll send that out, April 25th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So it'll be a narrative training and then a deep dive into how to apply the narrative to your campaign.
So I see another question from Kathleen, and that says, how are SRDs supposed to handle proof of residency? Will we have to obtain a photocopy of the
proof of ID?
Proof of ID. I don't think that's in there, but what it is the special deputy registrars have to sign a document saying that they obtained current information from that individual. And if it comes back, however, that person didn't obtain that current information from that individual, the SRD could get in trouble. So it's punitive. It's actually it's actually something that's punitive that could get the person that's registering the other person in trouble.
And another way to answer that is, no, you don't need a photocopy of the proof of ID, but you do need to make sure the number is accurate. One thing you can do is if you have a smartphone or camera, you can take a photo of the document and then you have that. You can also have that person look up their information on their phone, because people are walking around with computers, so they could look up their We Energies bill that's on their phone, and you could use that. So there are ways to work around this, but we do have to figure them out and get smarter. Wisconsin Voices will be a hub to talk about best practices as more people start to register people to vote and test out these new laws.
And I want to speak also from the perspective of the African American Roundtable. We will be having SRD trainings in the spring and in the summer. And the person that is going to come from the City of Milwaukee Election Commission will explain exactly what folks need to do and the best practices for protecting the SRDs from getting possibly for proof of residency.
And this goes actually into another question, asking, is there a 2020 committee that will be working on shortening the wait to vote on Election Day? So there's a few things that add up to long waits at Election Day. One is high participation and excitement, which we love. Two is when people don't get enough chances to early vote, which we see there is a tack on. So the more people can early vote, the shortening that will be. The third thing is when there's intimidation and poll workers are not moving people along easily. So we'll have an election protection group that will be all over the city and all over the state, and we'll be looking for volunteers for anyone who can join Wisconsin Voices election protection, so that anyone who's waiting in line gets the right to vote.
So I just want to put this in perspective here. You know, Joe asked a really good question, and I want to frame this up for all of the listeners that are on this webinar. We used to have a system in Wisconsin in which folks could early in-person absentee vote for a month. For an entire month, for 30 days in the state of Wisconsin, someone could in-person absentee vote here in the state of Wisconsin. Right now, we have 2 weeks. And with this new legislation, we really have less than 2 weeks because the night was slashed. After 7 o'clock, you can't do it. On the weekends, you can't do it. So now that window has been limited very, very much. And to top it off, we have one place where folks can in-person early absentee vote in the whole city of Milwaukee. So Joe, just to frame how, your question here, it's going to be difficult, but we're going to work together strategically to try to make this goal achievable. But it's going to be very difficult because things are not the way they used to be. The legislature has changed the rules significantly here on voting in the state of Wisconsin.
And I just want to recap the things that we're going to send to you. Tomorrow we'll send them to Joe and make sure everyone on this webinar gets it. But we're going to send the voter ID messaging, the old way and new way to talk about it, a democracy narrative, like what's the story we're telling about strengthening our democracy, the Heroes Handbook narrative training, which is happening April 25th. I'd like you to RSVP for that. And then the date and location for the next Democracy 2020 meeting, as well as our civic engagement meeting.
Are there any more questions before we wrap up here? Oh, Joe, I don't have a new number. It's still the same.
Mike's
Okay, well,
in the office with me at Wisconsin Voices, so if anyone needs to talk to him, you got to go through me. I'm his security guard.
Are there any more questions?
well, I want to thank Mike and Dana.
I just want to thank you all for caring so much about the state and our country and making sure that we live up to our creed of freedom and justice for all. It's, this structure and voting rights and good government might not be people's most important issues, but it's, in a lot of ways, it's got to be our first issue. Because if we don't take care and make sure that participation is possible for everyone and that people power is bigger than money power, we won't be able to, you know, make sure that our kids inherit a better world and make sure our schools are good, and you can go on and on. So it might not be the most important issue, but I'd argue it's the first issue.
Absolutely. Brandy has asked, will there be any narrative training during the evening after 5 p.m.?
Well, hey, Brandy, set up a meeting depending on what y'all need. I know that one's during the day, but I'd love to do a follow-up discussion, especially with your focus. It depending on what issue, we could get really specific and not just talk about a general training, but what actually are your goals and how do we use story and narrative to move those forward. So I would love to set that up with you, and you can contact me at Dana, D-A-N-A, at wisconsinvoices.org.
Absolutely. And I'm also going to inform folks of when the African American Roundtable are going to have SRD trainers come in to certify folks, to register folks to vote. I want those rooms full. I want to see an overflow packed room of folks that are SRD trained, certified, and actually informed and educated as to the new rules on how to register voters. We need folks to do that because right now there's been an attack on our democracy. But what makes this country great is the strength of our democracy, and we need to uphold and protect that strength. Thanks so much, everybody.
I have put Dana's email and Mike's email both up on the chat window, so you can copy those down if you want to get in touch with them. This is Nancy Kaplan at Grassroots North Shore. I want to remind everyone that the slides from tonight's presentation will be on our website, the grassrootsnorthshore.com website, and that we will also have a link to the audio and slide presentation available sometime tomorrow. So I want to thank everybody for coming. It's been a great presentation. Thank you, Mike and Dana. And don't forget to tune in to next week's webinar. Thanks a lot. Bye.